my world collapsed. I went from being on stage, from being loved by people to almost being hated. Our church split. Our staff split. I didn't have anyone to validate me. And so it really created an internal journey to look internally and find validation in myself. Okay, let's do it.
I am so excited. First of all, let me just say I'm so excited. I don't get to speak to matter experts very often. So when I get to have a therapist on, I mean, this is once in a blue moon opportunity. So this is the second time I get to have a therapist on. So without further ado, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Josh, thank you for having me on. I do appreciate it. You should know that this is like my third or fourth podcast that I've done. So it's an honor for me as well. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Joshua. My wife and I started a company called Simply Midori. I am a trauma therapist. I use IFS, EMDR in my practice, and my focus is on helping people heal practically in all aspects of their life, their relationships, from friendships to their marriage to their relationship with God and how they view the world. That's my short and brief introduction of who I am.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I did want to ask you, typically what I ask my guests, and this is going to be something that we might go down a very similar story that we've heard before, but I don't get to often ask from like a perspective of, hey, this is how you experienced it, but now through the lens of through the therapist lens, I guess, how do you see it now? And so I guess I just want to start with how what was childhood like for you? How many siblings did you have? Was it a cluttered house? Was it a quiet house? How was it?
Childhood was fascinating. I'm one of three and one of nine. So
Oh, wow.
my dad and my mom were married. They had three kids. I'm the youngest of three. I'm the youngest of that set of three. My brother and my sister are 8, 9 years older than me. So from that standpoint, my house was actually quiet because my siblings were that much older. I had a nanny that did the bulk of my raising. My dad worked a lot. And from the standpoint of I was also one of six, I am 17 years older than that batch of five kids as well. And so when I was 17, my dad was remarried and had his first kid, and then went on to have five kids after that. So
Oh, man.
uh, I'm one of three and one of nine.
Wow. So did you live how long did you live? Or did you live with only a specific group for a certain amount of time and then moved on, or how did that work?
So I lived with my brother and my sister for most of my childhood. Right, they went off to school, and my dad was married 7 different times.
Wow. Okay. So you got to meet quite a few partners then, right?
I did. I got to meet quite a few partners. I got to experience so many different personalities as a whole. And then with, I believe, the fourth wife, I believe it was the fourth, he started having children with. And so I was actually in the house where they had their child, and I believe I was with him until he was 2 years old, and then I went off to college.
Whoa. Okay. So you were with him from the time you were 2 to the time you went off to college?
I was no, and he was two until he became two.
Oh, I gotcha. I gotcha. Okay. And so then, uh, how did so did you, I have a lot of questions. Did you, when you were in the household, so you got to see them, like him split up and they left, or like, how did that work out?
So I this is what I got to see. I got to see my two people who, right, you talk about therapist lens. Two people that probably should have never gotten married, get married, try and stay married, realize that it's not working, call it quits. My dad move on. We typically went to a different house and they kept that house.
Mm.
And that's what I got to witness over and over and over and over again.
So you moved out. So basically, your dad would move out and then leave the partner with whatever place there was, and so you had
Right.
to pack up and go every time that they split up. Is that right?
Correct.
Wow. What? So your childhood must be like chaotic then, right? Because you're up and moving. How often were you? Was it just like once a year? Like how? I mean, this is quite a bit of partners.
I would say for the first stint, it was not a lot of moving. Let's just say for the first 7, 8 years. And then I would say after that it became pretty frequently, every 2 to 3 years. We packed up and moved, and typically we got new things as a result of moving.
And you mentioned being with your dad quite a bit. What was the situation with your mom? Did you not live with her most of your life? Or
My parents divorced at 3, and my mom moved. My dad had full custody of us. And so my mom came back maybe when I was in the 8th grade, and we tried like a bi-weekly scenario of custody. And essentially, the very first week my mom had custody, we got into a car accident,
oh man.
and my dad basically never allowed her to see us again. And she came back when I was 16 years old, 17 years old, somewhere around there. And so essentially my mom was completely out of the picture.
So then how would you say your relationship was with your mom then? Would you say that it's non-existent, or it was just very like, was she like a stranger to you?
Most definitely, my mom was a stranger to me. I didn't see her. I
Right.
didn't really have any concept. We would occasionally talk on the phone with her. I would say that when my mom came back, I wanted probably the mom that I saw on TV or saw in other people's parents. And right there, I would say that that relationship wasn't there. So she became more of a friend over anything else.
Wow. Yeah, that's hard, man. Let me ask you then, what was your school life like? Were you moving schools? Like how was that for you?
I did. I went to multiple schools as
Wow.
well. So it became, I would put it, I learned how to be whatever people needed to fit in, because I knew that I probably wouldn't be there long term. And so
Right.
in my mind, I developed a personality where I can jump in this dynamic. I can learn what you need, give that to you so that you love me, like me, etc. And I know that from there I'm moving on. So it was almost not a point to make uh right long-term connections or friendships as a result of that.
Looking back at it now, what would you assess that to have been? Is that, I don't want to use the wrong terminology here, so if I'm wrong, if I'm saying it incorrectly, just correct me. But would you call that like a people pleasing type of personality? Is that correct?
Absolutely. I think that I would describe it as I became a people-pleasing perfectionist.
Mm,
So I learned not only how to please you, I learned that if I did not do things well, almost as excellent as they could be done, you would not love me. And I would say that that became on repeat from parents, step parents, teachers, the entire thing. I learned how to do that as a kid.
And so I've met a couple of people that have gone through something not similar in the story that you're saying, but similar in the people pleasing personality aspect. In fact, my best friend considers himself a people pleaser, and it's because of the acceptance that he struggled to have when he was younger. So I'm curious, was there, what was your teenage years like? Were you, how did your personality, how did you find your personality? Because I imagine there must have been some kind of issue where you didn't have a personality, or you might have struggled to have your own personality for a while. Is that right?
Yes, I would say my personality became I learned that the cool kids valued the person that could get the most attention from the opposite sex, from girls. And so I essentially learned how to, for lack of a better word, manipulate women to get girls to go out, to validate I'm worth your friendship, or I'm worth your time, or I'm worth your attention from my peers. And I developed that as a skill, as a personality. And so my high school, I threw parties. I threw parties in my mom's house because my mom obviously wanted to have a relationship with me. And so she allowed us to throw parties at her house.
Mm.
And at these parties, there were alcohol, there were drugs, there were all types of things in high school that no kid should be exposed to. But I was essentially that kid. I was the kid that tried to be cool and tried to throw parties and sleep with as many women as I could.
What do you think? Do you think that that affected your ability to have relationships with women?
Absolutely. I think that because I would say because my own personal self worth was so low, uh, there was no way that I could actually treat anyone with actual respect or dignity. And so as a result, just cycled through relationship after relationship after relationship. And I would say that I left a trail of hurt, abuse, all of the things that you can imagine just from being a high school boy in that dynamic.
Hmm. Do you what was your relationship like with your siblings? Would you say that was it similar to how you mentioned with your friends, that you really didn't have the long-term connections, and did the people pleasing bleed into those relationships?
I think that there was a competition
Mm.
with my siblings. So I always trailed schools or anything behind them. And both of my brother was an athlete. My sister was academics. My brother, though, was also extremely smart. And so while I was great at school, I wasn't as great as either of them were as in school. Um, and so I would say that I probably didn't. I probably resented them more as a kid, and the fact that they were older, I didn't know how to express my resentment or frustration to them when there was a constant comparison of they did this or they did that. How come you aren't doing it? Or how come you aren't getting the same thing or getting the same grade in that? And so I would say that my sibling relationship, the combination of the fact that they were older and that led to us not really having a relationship at all. And I would say to even go one step further, because we all were vying for my dad's attention and approval, and he also had other women coming into the fold. It was an atmosphere of competition. Who could hold his attention and affection?
Yeah, yeah. So the resentment is something that I with siblings anyway, is something that I can relate to and have experienced. And I can tell you that the competition thing is real. And I learned only when I started going to therapy that a lot of the resentment that we had for each other was actually from the environment that we lived in. Because of because we were in survival mode, we essentially, that would cause the fights, as we were both essentially trying to survive our environment. And so there we would fight, whether it be physical fights. Oftentimes my brother would, my brother was polar opposite from me. So he would get very quiet and to himself. And if we could prevent making noise, or if we can prevent getting attention, negative attention, then we're good. And my thing was like, if I'm getting yelled at or if I'm getting mistreated, I'm going to say something. And so those were two opposite viewpoints in the same environment, and so it would cause a lot of conflict between us and later resentment because there's favoritism too within my siblings, and so that caused a lot of issues and resentment. So I completely, when you're saying that, that's really hard to navigate for anybody that hasn't experienced the resentment at home, because if my home isn't safe, then where am I safe? And I think that that's worth mentioning. So I am a little curious what with you're saying to keep your dad's attention. So was your dad at home? Like, was he not at home much? And so whenever you could get him, it was like, hey, let's get his attention. How was that?
Absolutely. My dad worked a lot. And so as a result of him working, whenever he was home, it became an all out sprint to get his attention. And we did little things that I would say created competition within us as well, looking back. Right. We did the cleanest room as a competition. And I remember he would come and inspect all of our rooms, and whoever had the cleanest room, that I believe it was monthly. I'm not 100% sure. Whoever got the cleanest room got $100. The second cleanest 75, and the third I believe was 50. But I'm not 100% sure. And we also did the same thing with report cards. Right, the highest GPA, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would say that there was just you talk about an atmosphere. There was just an atmosphere uh, of competition that breeded that resentment as a whole, and breeded the idea of favoritism, because whoever got this award, this money, was deemed worthy of his love or attention or respect for that period, and we celebrated that person within our household. And so the other two, as a result, were pushed away. And I imagine I would love to hear your dynamic. For us, my brother became the outspoken rebel. I'm going to buck everything here. And as a result, he was almost shunned. And I can recall so many moments where I was so much younger, so I didn't. My brother was doing or saying what I felt was correct, but because he was right, the black sheep, he was saying the things that shouldn't be said to your parent. We couldn't talk to him because you were right. He was I don't know if you are familiar with like the idea of leprosy, but he was like the leper in our house, where you, right, you didn't touch him or talk to him as we got older, as a result of just kind of some of the comments or the remarks that he would say. Would you say that was a similar dynamic that maybe was created between you and your brother?
So I think for me, and I've actually heard this from my younger sister, because my brother and my sister. So here's the deal. Let me just paint you the picture, just so that it's really understood the dynamic we had. So years later, we talked about this as adults, but there was always the feeling, and I didn't know this. This was just unspoken when I was growing up. Was that there was favoritism, and that my mom's favorite was me, and so because of that. I never really understood why my brother, particularly, who's a year and 9 months older than me, why there was so much, why he was so angry with me all the time. Like I felt like there was, like, I didn't say much to you, but I would defend myself. And so that was one of the things that if let's say, for example, I'm just sitting here and we sat in the living room a lot because we shared a room together. So the room was really only for sleeping. We did not hang out in our rooms. So we hung out in the living room, and we would be around each other all the time. And so we had my stepdad was very verbally and emotionally abusive, and so he did not accept us as his kids. When he got married to my mom, he never accepted myself and my brother, and then he verbalized that. And so the dynamic that we had at my house was me and my brother were essentially trying to survive an environment in which we weren't welcome, and so there was a fight for my mom's affection, right? And so then I didn't know this, but I did eventually start to pick up on it, and I acknowledged that, okay, my mom did seem to favor me in the way of talking about me more, right? And so that was enough. Like that's how small the affection, like the emotional affection we had as kids, was that like being talked about, not even like spending more time together, because that was my biggest complaint to my brother. It's like, it's not like I got more time with my mom. It's just that she talked about me more, and so that was enough to cause like a rift. And it's like, you're the problem. And so he would try to find little things that I did wrong, and like put a magnifying glass on it and be like, see, he's not that good. See, look, he's not worthy of that. And so we would fight a lot. And so what I would have to do is he would randomly sit there and be like, you left all this on the floor, and then like trying to blame me for stuff. And so I would defend myself. I'd be like, this isn't all mine. And so I would respond back. And so he, as teenagers, he had a hard time controlling his anger. And so a couple of times he physically abused me. And so that kind of growing up, that created that character in me of I have to be a fighter. Like I have to learn to defend myself. Like I have to get strong. And so that's kind of what led me down the road with my brother, where eventually I outgrew him. And so there was a point in time where he tried that and it didn't work anymore. And this is when I came back from the Marine Corps, and it's like something had shifted. And so there was this feeling of, well, I'm just going to distance myself since I can't control you anymore. Now I'm just going to distance myself from you, and I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And so recently, I'm talking about within the last year or so, I've been trying to rebuild that of, hey, what happened? And sit down with them. But just to answer your question, it's got a little long-winded. I apologize. But to answer your question, the dynamic of me having to say something was like, I don't feel I deserve this. And so I have to defend myself because I feel like I'm on my own. And that's where that personality in me evolved.
You got it. That's so tough being in that environment. And what about your sister?
So
Where
my
did
younger,
she fit in?
oh man, she had it rough. I'm not gonna lie to you. We all did. To be completely honest with you, we all did. But she had it. She had it uniquely difficult because, so she's the biological child of my stepdad. So she's my half sister biologically, and so we have the same mom, obviously, and so it was difficult because my stepdad not having accepted myself and my brother, or any of the children my mom had outside of the marriage, the not being accepting of us was difficult for her too, because we're still her siblings. Like she grew up around us. Like we by all accounts, and I don't see her as half sister. And any of my other siblings, like my oldest brother is my half sibling too, technically. But I grew up with him. Like I have memories of him as a child. We have pictures together. He held me when I was a baby, and so there's no distinction for us as siblings of, oh, this is my half sibling, and so this is from another marriage, and so I see them separately in the way that my stepdad saw us, like not his children. She did not see us as not siblings, and I did not see her as not full sibling either. And so she had it difficult because that's her dad. And so you want to have a good parents. And so for her, she had to come to this realization that like, my maybe I don't have a good dad. And my mom, unfortunately, because of her trauma with her mom, she has a hard time with relationships with women, with other women. And so with my older sister, like my older sister does not talk to my mom. They have been fighting for years. One of the things my mom admitted to me is that she tried to be her friend rather than her mom, and so that became a huge problem. And there was, this is my thing, right? I think my mom struggles with being affectionate, like emotionally affectionate, as you would expect a mother to be, right? Like when you go to your mom, at least the way I see it, I want my mom to be, when I, as a kid, when I get hurt, when I fall, when I don't know, when I have a bad day and I come home from school, and I expect of my mom to be that affectionate the hugging mother, the hey, everything's going to be okay.
Right.
That's not how my mom was growing up. And so that's not to say that she's a bad person or that she intended to do that, but because of her trauma with her mom, she has the inability, especially and with women, it's almost like she's resentful of women when they do things that she's judgmental of, like maybe things that she when she was younger she did, mistakes she made, she's judgmental of those when my sisters came of age and started making similar mistakes to when she made. And that's what it feels like because I don't know how to describe it to you, to be honest. You'd have to ask my sister that one, but I know that she had it uniquely difficult because she felt like my mom didn't love her. And that's one thing that has been very difficult. And for me, I felt like as a kid, I felt like my mom and I were close. And when I went through therapy, I started realizing that what I saw as love wasn't that. It was more so like my mom shows love the way that she was shown love by her dad, which her dad, she was very close with her dad, and her dad would help her monetarily because there was no affection of like, hey, I love you. I want you to know that, and I'm here for you whenever. My mom would be like, hey, do you need money for gas? Hey, here's money. It was monetary. It's gift giving. I believe that's her love language is gift giving. And so that made it difficult for my sister to feel loved because my mom wasn't this like, I'll hug you when you're struggling.
Right.
There, especially with women, she was especially judgmental and hard with the women, 100%.
Isn't it so fascinating how much right your great who knows how far back parents impacts us today?
That's so see, that's another, you bring up the next topic of conversation, which has been a big focus for me has been generational trauma. And we had a conversation prior to this and it has been spinning in my head for some time. So please, if you wouldn't mind telling a little bit about the effects, how generational trauma works, how it's passed down, and how you feel it affects our society today.
Okay, well, what a question.
It's a big one. I'm sorry.
I will talk about me from my standpoint because I
Sure.
think that it will be more helpful uh, from the standpoint of how does it affect us today. So my dad was raped by his dad. My dad is one of 16. At 14, uh, 13 or 14, I was by my older cousin. My dad spent his entire um, adulthood from this sense of control to protect us. Control, at least from how I look at it now, it was a control to protect. Probably so much because of how his dad treated him. As a result of my grandfather being his son, and I believe out of the 16, he 14 of them, they all went on to also additionally raise their kids. So, for context, I didn't really see most of my family because so many of them were raping their kids as a result of not healing their trauma. Okay. So, here that's the start of this. Rumor has it it goes on before my grandfather. So you basically have when you talk about generational trauma, I have a family of and and those people had children with their kids.
Mm.
And so I have a history of not only did they my grandparents, great grandparents, their kids, they had kids with them. And as a result of having kids with them, they didn't want to put that person in any type of jail or anything because A, you didn't bring shame to the family, and B, you wanted that person to have their father, quote unquote. And as a result, none of the women that were married to these guys ever did or said anything because but who knows what environment they existed or grew up in. And so I said that to say, you take my family and you basically just keep passing down this, this trauma idea of everyone is probably trying to protect, control. And as a result of this protection and control, we keep each other. We keep having kids with each other. And then we're recycling this idea of dysfunction because none of us are actually talking to each other because we're all afraid that they're going to our kids, but it's all actually happening. And as a result, we just keep passing down. From what I see, my family specifically is passing down the trauma of just leaving. So if there's conflict, if there's tension, if there's disagreement, I'm just going to leave and I'm going to be done with it. And simultaneously, though, for family, we pass down, we're going to stick around no matter what happens because you're family. So we're going to stick it out for abuse, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Like we're going to stick it out for that context because we're family, but we won't stick it out for anyone else that we don't deem family in a sense. And so as a result, for me now, not only right, I would say that I was as a result of my dad was in such a spirit of control that I was a rebel against it and put myself in situations and circumstances where I wanted validation.
Mm, right.
And I would say I wanted validation and approval so much that I was willing to do anything from the standpoint of I just wanted you to tell me that I was loved and valued. And so I see me passing that down so much so that now I see my kids where I listen to my kids' language and they'll say little things like, I just don't feel like you love me. And it's you're 5 years old. And I understand that this is a moment where you are frustrated, right? And you don't want to do whatever it is that I'm telling you to do. However, to have such strong language and to look at their little faces with the tears and to say such things, right? It goes to the idea of generational trauma, which is epigenetics, which is it's in our DNA. We pass down the history of trauma in our DNA. And if we don't start to heal some of these things, I believe her name is Gina Marie. She's a therapist and she wrote a book called Generations Deep. And she talks about what we're seeing to answer your question of today is we see now decades of trauma that's being passed. And finally, we're at the point of a society where it's passed and compounded so much that people have just hit the breaking point of they don't know how to navigate this trauma. And so the idea that, right, you're depressed and you don't really have an idea of why, or you feel lonely and you don't really have an idea of why. This is in our DNA, and it's been passed down to you from grandparent to parent to grandparent to on and on to the point where we almost have to deal with it or perish in a sense because it's going to affect us so much.
You said something that was really powerful, and I think that's one of the things that I didn't realize, because when I thought of generational trauma, I looked at it as, well, it's just what behaviors had been learned before, and you're just repeating them. But there's a compounding element that I didn't think about, where it's like, not only are you doing that, you're also adding your coping mechanisms. You're also adding your layers that in your lifetime you added to cope with what was being passed down. And so it's a snowball. It's actually getting bigger. I didn't think of that. I thought it was like, well, I think that the reason why people are addressing mental health now is more out of just more knowledge, which is partially true. But when you mention the compounding element, well, now it's like like you mentioned, it's either we deal with it or we perish, because you can't live your life anymore of how much compounding there's been. It's not feasible to do it in a healthy manner, or to do it in a way that you can get through a lifetime without having some sort of problem, without dealing with it, because it's been compounded. So that, I think that point is just huge, that I just never thought about. Like, you don't think about something that it adds,
Right.
you know? So I am, it makes a lot more sense now, of why I see so much divisiveness and so much vitriol, I think, in it walking around in people today, is because now you have to deal with it, because it's affecting your interactions with other people, which is necessary in a society to progress.
Well, I kind of look at our society now like this because, right, I focus on trauma. We all, consciously or subconsciously, have trauma. And in the trauma, right, are triggers. And the idea that we don't have trauma, I think, is so fascinating. I think that for some of us, like me, being right, it's in your face. You have to deal with it. Right. I don't really have an option. But there's other people that were, their parents just worked all the time, or their parents got divorced, or right, fill in the blank. And so many of those things that we consider tiny create these ideas. I'm not worthy of love. If
Right.
I don't do X, I'm not valuable. If, right, we create these ideas as a result of some of these basic things that our society create. And so we're all walking around with these gashes that have healed, but we've put like this band-aid over it. And now I come and poke it or touch it or rub up against it, and you have no idea of this gash. And I don't really have an idea of this gash, but I know that I know that I know that it hurts. And
Right.
so, because I've been in this state, right? You mentioned hypervigilance, survival state for so long, I'm no longer have the ability to emotionally uh, realize that it's not you that I'm angry with. So I am going to come out as angry, vengeful, attackful, aggressive as I can, because you just rubbed up against
Right.
this gash that I've been protecting, that so many other people have rubbed up against, and you have no idea. And so now I'm essentially attacking you with everything that I've got. And me attacking you has now rubbed up against your gash.
Sure. And it's just this snowball effect, right? And so let me ask you, I'm going to ask you a very personal question. And then you're feel free to, whether you want to discuss it or not. But when you mentioned the rape that you experienced, how did that affect you internally? What did you do to survive?
I would say, first off, I learned that me as a person had nothing to offer. Uh, and I mean that in every aspect. Like, I think that one of the things that I probably didn't even realize when you are, is like you're so violated that your your worth essentially totally plummets. Like, nothing that I do, I got into a constant state of trying to prove that just me as a person is worth talking to, listening to, investing in, being friends with, dating. whatever context you want to put it in, I feel like I constantly needed to prove my value. Um, I would say is one thing. I would say the second thing is I learned constant shame. Um, there's not there was never a moment in my life where if I didn't make even the smallest mistake, um, the the internal voice just went on overdrive. Uh, and that's everything. If I did anything even somewhat wrong, or even if it was things that this person may consider I did great, but because I didn't feel like I did it to the best of my abilities, um, right, it would just kick in all these voices of shame, of doubt, of criticism. And so I think that it created what I really learned is to not trust myself and to never value myself.
With the not trusting yourself, in what way and how can you give me an example of what not trusting yourself meant?
Yes. I think that um, if you look at majority of my adulthood, there was this state that I swung so far of I need to protect myself and only look out for myself that I essentially created this overdrive of ego. And then I found Christianity and I became a Christian. And I would say the context that I learned Christianity of servant and humility, I swung back almost to the other side of what we call a self abandonment. And so when I say I didn't trust myself, I I couldn't trust any of my thoughts, and I didn't trust that I knew what was best for my life. And so I turned to experts, I turned to podcasts, I turned to leaders, I turned to pastors to basically fully guide me because my internal guide, let's call it, was broken. It was just off. I view it as if it was a compass, it was just doing this.
Mm. Right.
And so I always needed to look externally to do anything. So even if it was a decision, like, should I come on this podcast? I would go and search for validation to prove if I should do it or not, regardless of if I thought I should do it. And that really happened in every aspect of life. Almost every decision that I made, I would need to verbally process with somebody to tell me, yes, you should do it, or you're doing good, or you're doing what you think you're doing what you should be doing. Any of those things. That's kind of how it showed up.
I would imagine that that must have been probably very confusing because if you go to different people, they're going to tell you different things. And so one of the things that, this is a thing that I struggled to understand because I had my last partner that I had this specific thing you're saying, where there was like she had to check in with somebody and before I do anything, I have to tell them, and I would get upset, and I would say, like, how are they going to make decisions for you, right? Because I'm looking at it from my perspective, the way that I exist in life, and it's very different from hers, and so I would sit there and be like, at the end of the day, like, they're not going to live your consequences. They're not going to live with your decisions. And so if it feels right for you, is it not enough? And for you to be clarifying what that's like is an eye-opening thing for me because I have struggled to grasp that mindset.
Well, I'm thinking of this book right now that I want to write, and it's does my validation have value? And essentially, the what I'm wrestling with is so much of my life, my own personal validation essentially didn't matter, like, at all. And when I say at all, like 0%. And so when you say like the consequences or navigating, or I logically knew that, of
Right.
course, you like logically, of course, I could sit here and say that, but subconsciously, because I didn't value myself so much, it really didn't matter uh, as a whole because I not only didn't value myself, I also wanted you to like me.
Mm-hmm.
So if I took what you said and applied it to my life, it would work. And what you also said is also equally true. I needed to do it across the board. And so I found myself taking snippets of like what people said, applying it to my life, and then getting frustrated because I took your advice. I did what you said. I did what you wanted, and you still didn't love me.
Mm. That's very powerful, and that kind of brings that into perspective for me. So thank you for that. By the way, that's been something that I've kind of sat with me for a long time. So I think that that's important to mention because when for me, my survival skill was that I have to look out for myself and that trusting others is a question mark. And so the trusting of others has the not having the ability to trust others had been what developed my viewpoint of you can only trust yourself because everybody else isn't trustworthy. And it's crazy. Those are polar opposite reactions to a trauma, but it makes sense when you're explaining it. And that's something that I think is important to say about that. It isn't about you. It's about that person and their lack of self-worth. And the funny thing is, I still had lack of self-worth too. That's just how I survived. You know, it's crazy that how the different survival skills for similar things happen.
Right. Yeah. Would would you say that looking back on that relationship, you ever were able to sit down and fully listen to her and understand that dynamic? Or would you just say like that's illogical and push forward?
So both. So I would. So here's the thing. She did not like confrontations, and I prefer confrontations. Like if there's a problem, we need to have a conversation about it. That was always my viewpoint. Was if I've upset you in some way, and I said this to her before. I said you're gonna have to hurt my feelings sometimes to get your point across because that's just how. Like if you don't communicate what you're feeling, it's better that you hurt my feelings in saying how you actually feel than for you to withhold it and me find out later that you actually had a problem with something the whole time and I lived a fabrication of what I thought the truth was. And so I used to say that to her all the time, and I probably said it wrong. I probably said it judgmental and made her feel like it wasn't safe to say it. And so I think that while I did when she did finally say something was typically when she was walking out the door. When she finally was like, hey, I think this is a problem and this has been a problem, like she would tell me, like, I kind of already had a foot out the door anyway. And so it kind of felt like at this point it didn't really matter. So I was just going to say it. And I remember being so upset about that. I was like, I don't feel like I got a chance to even fix the problem. Like I feel like I was robbed of an ability to make this work. And so there was judgment from me on that in that response of I remember saying this to her out loud once. I was like, I feel like I'm pulling as fast as I can, and it's not fast enough to save this relationship. And so she would tell me that, well, I feel the same way too. And I said, I don't believe that. I said, because I'm only finding out now that this is how you're feeling. And I've done everything that I could to try to get you to communicate that when you're upset about something. You're saying you can't do that. So do you even want to be, can you even be here? Do you even want to be here? And I remember confronting her about it multiple times, and she would say, no, I'm fine. It's fine. And that she wanted to be there. And eventually, because we split up twice, the first time completely blindsided me. She just one day was like, hey, I can't do this. And I was like, huh? What? Can't do what? We hadn't been like, we've had our disagreements, but from her perspective, disagreements were like catastrophic. And I remember her telling me that having a disagreement, like an argument, was like, it felt like the world was over. And for me, it was just It was just a disagreement. That's how I saw it. And so basically for her, she would go into survival mode when we would argue. And so she would close up and fawn, I guess is the response.
Right.
And I didn't really pick up on that. I didn't really understand it. So in going to therapy, I did get more of an insight. And so that's why I'm able to look at it now and go, I probably was triggered by that. And then my ability to listen, she's told me that I would stonewall her. Sometimes I would get so upset with what she was saying that I would just walk away. I'd be like, I can't. And I'd leave because I knew I was getting upset and I was going to say something very mean if I didn't. And she would follow me because she said that she would feel like I wasn't going to talk about it ever again. And that wasn't how I felt about it. Like I could talk about it later, but I never said it. I never communicated that. And so I would just walk away and she would be like following me. And I'd tell her, stop doing that because I'm upset and I need to walk away because if we continue to have this conversation the way we're having it, I'm going to say something rude. And so she kept prying at it. And eventually I would say something rude. And then she would like shut down. I'm like, so what was it that you were looking for? I told you what was going to happen. And she's like, I just felt like I couldn't say it. If we didn't solve it or if we didn't say it now, I would never say it. And that's the cycle that we would go through. And so truth be told, we were both two people that weren't able to have a healthy relationship. And so because we didn't love ourselves, that love that you're saying of the self-worth, I didn't have it enough to be able to hear her out when she was feeling a certain type of way, whether it was how I said something or how I did something. I would have a hard time with her being angry. I remember women being angry at me is something that like sends me into a spiral. Like I can't have that. I have to shut that down as soon as possible. And so whenever she would get upset, whenever she would start getting angry, I would be angrier because I need to shut that down as soon as possible because I can't have that because that's rejection.
Right.
And so that's what I would do in response. And so you see how this would just cycle. It would just turn into this over and over and over. And so eventually it's like, we can't be. And I had confronted her. I was like, I don't think you want to be here. And so if you want to leave, unfortunately, I have that belief that you can't leave. Like you have to stay here and make it work. And so I told her, like, I want to stay here. Like, I think we can, if we can both talk about it and come around to it, I think that we can make it work. But if not, if you feel like you can't, like, I don't feel like you want to be here is what I would tell her. Like, I don't feel like you want to be here. And if you don't want to be here, don't be here. And eventually she was like, yeah, I need to go. And so that's how that ended.
Right. It's interesting that, right. Because I would be like your partner in this scenario, that you feel like, she didn't want to be there or wasn't trying. Because my like how I viewed relationships in the past before getting married, and probably even my marriage to a certain extent, is like I'm working on overdrive. So I'm doing so much to please you and keep you happy that if we're on a number scale, I'm giving 160%. Because I'm keeping mental track of everything that you need to be happy, and I'm implementing it.
And see, here's the thing, like my perfectionism comes into play at this point where it's like, I am so, what was the word? I was so emotionally brittle that
right.
Anything that challenged how I felt about myself, anything that challenged the stability of the life I was living, I would become extremely defensive and I would come at it extremely aggressive because my purview was I need to shut this down as soon as possible to prevent rejection from happening. That's ultimately what it was at the end of the day, I need to fight rejection as fast as possible so I don't have to feel it. And I remember my therapist calling me out on it because there was times where when I would start to get upset, I would shove it down. She told me that I have this, she's like, you have this ability to, when you're starting to feel something, like you're like a faucet, like you just turn the switch off. And she's like, you have this incredible ability to just shut that off. And that's what's preventing you from really getting to the root of what you're feeling. So I would just, when I would feel sadness, because ultimately anger was just a disguise for my sadness. And it's one of the things that's how I masked my sadness, was I would just get angry and I would have this reaction. And as soon as I felt myself feeling anything, I would just push it off and then switch my emotion off and hit play like a recording on my experience when I was telling a traumatic story. And I remember my therapist calling me out on it. I think that's one of the reasons too that it was difficult for me to be empathetic for what I was hearing, for why things were happening, or why she was experiencing what she was experiencing.
We shared that ability to turn off our emotions like a faucet. As a result of me growing up with so many women, and just so much turn of relationship dynamics from the schools, etc. I found that I had to turn off emotional engagement to not get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So even like it's weird. Even like missing people, I don't really miss people. Because I have found that I've learned to right just shut that part off of, you will probably leave anyway, so why should I create emotional attachments or emotional bonds to you?
See, that's another thing too that I saw in my partner, was that it seemed as though she wasn't emotionally there. And so I told her that a lot of times I felt like I came home and I was coming home to nobody, because emotionally she was not there. And it became almost like a chore to have to like speak to me. And so that's the things that I became hypersensitive to. It's funny how you attract your fears. My fear was having an emotionally absent partner. And so I would somehow attract or be attracted to partners that were not emotionally present. That's just how that's been the history of if you look at the people I've dated, that's the history.
And where would you say you are now? Like, do you, like, I get so many people that are single that are looking, and I say one of the reasons my wife and I work is because she's not who I would normally attract.
Oh, that's what would you say is what you would normally attract, and what you found in your wife?
I would say I would attract my mom. So exactly what you said. She's not going to be emotionally available. She's not going to necessarily cater to my own internal sensitivities. She well, I would say I typically attracted the person that saw me as someone that was driven and forceful and could hitch onto my bandwagon, and for lack of a better metaphor, ride me out until the end, type of thing. And I would say that was typically the woman that I found. And I would say my wife, I'll never forget this. I was working on this real estate investment deal, and my wife and I, we weren't married. We were probably in, maybe this is the second or third month of us dating. And most women I dated knew I did real estate and knew I did development deals. I can't give you one that ever inquired about the investment process, the deal process, just anything. It was much more about like the money side of how much we made or what, right? That context. My wife, was we were dating, she knew I had this meeting with these Chinese investors, and the entire day before, she texted me all types of things to basically help me get my head in the game, so to speak, because she knew it was a big meeting for me. And she checked in all throughout the day. And it was one of those moments that was like, wow, this feels so weird that someone is actually just caring about me.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost felt, to be honest, like, A, I don't deserve this. And B, I wanted to push it away because it was so foreign.
I was just about to ask if it created fear in you of like, oh, like if this person might leave or something like that.
Absolutely, because I feel like she created uh right. I look at our marriage. I never, as weird as it is to be a people pleaser, uh I also don't like depending on people
Hmm.
because of my belief they're going to leave anyway.
Yeah.
And I found that, right, my fear was entirely my wife is engaging with me emotionally. Uh, and she's creating almost a dependence on her.
Right.
And so, with a belief that she's going to leave anyway, like she's showing me too much love, too much affection, too much care. And so, the combination of I don't deserve this and she's going to leave anyway, really, I would say, really created this idea of I need to reject this or push this away before it blows up in my face.
Right. And let me ask you, how much time do you have, by the way? I don't want to take up your
Uh,
time.
I have 10, 15 minutes.
10, 15 minutes. Can I ask you, what is it, at what point inspired you to pursue the path? What was it? Was there a moment? Was there a sequence of moments that inspired your journey to what you're doing now?
Uh, I would say I started looking at not just my life, the life of so I need to rewind. So when I after I found Jesus, fast forward, I came on church staff, became a pastor. That's how the counseling journey started. Um, in that I saw this dynamic of these people have so much unresolved trauma that they're bringing into their marriage.
Mm,
And so, because I did so much couples counseling, I got to see the same dynamic just on repeat. Where you mentioned the fond response, I got to see one person or the other be so aggressive, so forceful. We have to talk about it now. We have to do this now. We have to figure it out. And another person that just completely shut down. And it kind of just created this sequence of this is such a weird thing to see so much, to see through so many couples. And so that kind of got me to thinking, and then fast forward just as a whole within my life, I looked at uh it was really COVID. I would say COVID got me off of church staff and really got me into focusing on therapy full time for people, specifically for trauma. Uh, my world collapsed. I went from being on stage, from being loved by people, uh, to almost being hated.
mm,
Right, our church split, our staff split, and as a result, my I didn't have anyone to validate me. So I didn't have the staff to validate me anymore. I didn't have like the physical numbers that we were doing in our church to validate me anymore. I didn't have any of those validations. And so it really created an internal journey to look internally and find validation in myself uh, as a whole. And then I would say, as I went through my own journey, I started to really look outside and look at all of the people that I either counseled or connected with or came through our church or any way, shape, or form that were struggling with the same thing. And the advice that I gave them as a counselor
right.
that wasn't even the best advice, just because of my own uh, brokenness
Right.
as a whole. And it really, I would say that's what really uh, propelled me further to explore more, learn more, and heal myself and offer others more healing, more freedom.
And just to kind of wrap things up a little bit, I'm going to ask you a few questions that I ask every guest. And firstly, uh, where can we find you? Is there anything that you have, social media, anything where we can where people can look to see what you're doing?
Yeah, it's I feel like I think I'm the only Joshua Doumani in the world. Almost every platform is Joshua Doumani. I'm probably most active on Instagram or on Threads. And as far as what we're doing, you can go on our website. It's simplymaduri.com. And there, uh, I believe that everyone should have some type of therapy as a whole. Uh, and if you are unable to afford therapy, we make articles every day based on what we deem the good life, a relationship with yourself. So we make articles, a relationship with friends, how to navigate, have, attract the right friendships, a navigation with a spouse. So that's your entire dating life, single life, how to navigate that, how to find contentment with it, a relationship with family, because our families, well, mine specifically, right, so much dysfunction, how to raise a healthy family, what attachment styles look like, a relationship with God, how even basic things, right? You hear people say all the time, I don't feel close to God, right? So much of that is a trauma response that we don't realize. And a relationship with work, how to just have a healthy relationship with work, purpose, goals, all of those things. And so we write articles on all of those subjects that's completely for free to people, for people to go and learn and develop and learn practical skills and tools for their life.
And have you discovered purpose? And if not, what do you think it might be? And if it is, what do you think purpose is for you?
I think that purpose is ever evolving in every season. I think that if I looked exactly where I am now, if I didn't go through anything that I did went through, I would. There's no way I would be here. Right? I always say I think that's so why I believe I am a good therapist is because I've actually had to heal so much of my trauma.
Right.
And so as a result of being able to sit there and I know what it's like to have depression. I know what it's like to go through a suicide attempt. I know so many of these things that I also know what it took to heal. I also know what it took to navigate. And I would say that those things have allowed me to be a better therapist. And so I would say my purpose as of now is to help people heal and live a whole, fulfilling life. And I would say that it's probably going to keep on evolving and changing as I grow, evolve, and change.
If you could speak to your childhood self, what would you say?
Oh, what a question. I think that I would say relax. It's okay. And it's not your fault.
That's something that I think any child hopes to hear when they're going through a traumatic event or traumatic childhood. I can't thank you enough for having taken the time out of your schedule with what you're doing. I can't tell you how much I respect what you're doing, and there's so much more that I want to talk to you about, but we'll just have to do it another time because there's so much there, and the journey is ongoing. Just as the conversations we have are ongoing, and hopefully there's something that we can continue to teach each other and learn from. And I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you so much, Joshua.
Yeah, have a great day, and thanks for having me. You know, what you're doing with starting this podcast and being able to be open about your own journey and healing, especially as a military man, right? When you're strong and macho, I think means a lot, and I think will open the door to a lot of our own unhealthy systems. And so I'm grateful for people like you that are willing to put your life and your journey out there for others to learn and to heal.
Thank you so much, and take care, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
Okay, have a great day.
You too. Bye bye.